Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. All right, let's just jump right in today. We are unpacking day 26 of the After the Hurt journey. Now, the source material takes a highly structured, really thoughtful approach to complex emotions, and our focus today is on a pretty profound concept, the post-traumatic growth prayer. We're going to break down how the text suggests that incredibly painful places can actually transform into spaces of deep, profound growth. It's an absolutely fascinating framework for processing trauma, and we're going to look at exactly how the author outlines this path toward restoration.
It all starts with this incredibly simple but honestly profoundly heavy statement from the text. Pain is real. You know, a lot of times when we talk about growth, society kind of pushes us to just look on the bright side, right? Or just quickly move past the hurt. But the whole foundation of today's material requires validating that hurt first. Full stop. The text makes it clear that if you are hurting, your emotional state is completely valid. It argues that you literally cannot build a structured path to healing if you're pretending the ground beneath you isn't broken. So acknowledging that the pain is real, that is presented as the absolute first step in this entire framework.
And that brings us to our core concept for today, the reality of pain. This sets the ground rules for everything that follows in the author's argument. The basic premise here is that we have to honestly look at the hurt before we can formulate any kind of prayer or strategy for healing. It's like trying to bandage a wound in a pitch-black room. You have to turn the light on and see it clearly first, no matter how uncomfortable that light might be. The text categorizes this as an assessment phase. It's not about just sitting in the dark and being miserable. It's about acknowledging the reality of the pain so you know exactly what it is you're bringing to God for healing.
So what does that reality actually look like? Well, the source emphasizes three distinct areas of validation that we need to address. First up, what happened matters. The events, the history, the actual timeline of the hurt, they aren't insignificant. Second, what was lost matters. Whether that was a relationship, a missed opportunity, your sense of safety, or maybe an entire season of your life, the text asserts that grieving those things is completely justified. And third, what wounded you matters. The specific mechanism of the pain is important. By structuring it this way, the author is basically giving the reader permission to validate specific losses instead of just carrying around this vague, heavy cloud of sadness. Every single detail of the hurt is treated as absolutely vital to the healing process.
But, and this is a massive but, here is where the text makes a crucial pivot. Pain does not have the final word. While the source spends a lot of time validating that the wounds are real and they matter, it also establishes some very strict boundaries around that pain. It suggests that while pain might be a chapter in your story, and let's be real, maybe a very long, very dark chapter, it is not the conclusion. This is the big transition point from the stark reality of the wounds to the structured hope of healing. By recognizing that pain is a real entity, the framework also dictates that it has limits. It simply doesn't get to write your ending. Which leads us straight into a working definition of post-traumatic growth in a spiritual context. It says, with God, painful places become places where wisdom, compassion, strength, and purpose grow. Now, the mechanics here are incredibly important to unpack. The text is not claiming that the painful events themselves were good. No way. Instead, it argues that because God is good, He is an expert at cultivating life in the most barren soil imaginable. He can bring immense beauty from entirely broken places. So the pain didn't just magically become a good thing. Rather, the wisdom, the compassion, the strength, and the purpose that grow inside a person in the aftermath, those are the good things. It represents a miraculous transformation of the site of the trauma, not a justification of the trauma itself. To put this into perspective, let's look at a really vital distinction the text makes. On one hand, you've got this super common but deeply flawed misunderstanding that says everything that happened was good. But on the other hand is the actual framework we're anchoring to today. God can still work good in the middle of it. This directly connects to the famous biblical verse Romans 8:28, which talks about God working all things for the good of those who love Him. The author is super careful to separate these two ideas. The verse isn't interpreted to mean the abuse or the loss or the betrayal was somehow good. It means that despite all those terrible things, God's ability to weave goodness, redemption, and growth into a story remains undefeated. He works good right in the dead center of the mess.
So, once we have that framework in mind, how do we actually apply it? The text moves right from theory into practical application, praying through unresolved places, because it acknowledges that, well, we all have them. We all have those jagged edges of a story that just don't make sense yet, or relationships that are still fractured, or internal wounds that still ache. The actionable step prescribed by the source material is to take that concept from Romans 8:28 and actively pray it over an unresolved area in your life. And the text suggests doing this for yourself, or even over the life of a child, a family member, or a friend who is walking through their own unresolved pain.
To help us do this, the source actually lays out a very specific prayer. It begins with just total, brutal honesty. Lord, this still feels unresolved, but I invite you into it. The brilliance of phrasing it this way is that it doesn't ask you to pretend you have it all figured out. It simply takes the messy, unfinished situation, acknowledges exactly where it's at, and just opens the door for God to enter the room. It's this beautiful, foundational step of surrender before you even ask for anything specific.
Once that invitation is made, the text outlines 4 very intentional requests. Bring healing, wisdom, protection, and purpose. Notice how incredibly structured this is. It asks for healing for the raw wound itself. It asks for wisdom to understand what can actually be learned from this new vantage point. It asks for protection, fully acknowledging how vulnerable we are when we're hurting. And finally, it asks for purpose, that post-traumatic growth we defined earlier, trusting that genuine meaning can be cultivated right in the center of the hurt.
The prayer then wraps up with this incredibly powerful declaration. Let pain not be wasted, and let your goodness be seen. The text frames this as the ultimate cry of post-traumatic growth. It's essentially asking to be a witness to God's goodness even when you are standing in the middle of a story that is not yet complete. The goal outlined here is that the heavy price of the pain actually yields a dividend of grace and goodness, one that becomes visible not just to you, but to literally everyone around you.
As the source material starts to wrap up this section, it offers a 2-step pastoral blessing for the reader. Step 1, may God cover what still hurts. And step 2, may He protect what is still tender. The author uses a fantastic visual metaphor here. Think about it. Just like a physical wound needs a covering to keep out infection, it needs protection because that brand new skin is incredibly fragile, our emotional and spiritual state requires that exact same level of care during recovery. The hope expressed here is that God steps into those unresolved spaces and provides exactly that covering and protection while the growth process continues.
Which brings us to a final thought for today. The source text leaves us with this reflection question for day 26. Where do I need to believe that God is still working? It's a pretty profound challenge to stop and identify those specific, unresolved areas in our own lives. How might reframing your absolute deepest hurts through the lens of post-traumatic growth completely change your trajectory today? It's definitely a question worth carrying with you. Thanks so much for joining me as we unpack today's explainer, and I will see you in the next one.